All right. Isolated concentrated nutrients. I want you to understand what we're talking about here is taking the ingredients in plant foods and isolating and concentrating them. And what I mean by isolating is you take this particular nutrient and you separate it from the protein, the other vitamins, the other minerals, from the carbohydrates, from the fats. In other words, it's just isolated and also concentrated, and then concentrated thousands in fold in concentration and put into pills. At best it's medicinal, like if you have to treat scurvy or you have to treat beriberi or pellagra, or even vitamin D deficiency, which we're going to talk about in our next series about supplements. I'm going to talk to you about vitamin D and how you're being misled with that particular supplement. And we'll also get into the free fatty acids in the next lecture. So vitamins, and I want to distinguish vitamins from minerals for you. Vitamins are tiny organic compounds. They're vital, that are required for you to be healthy. They cannot be synthesized by your body in sufficient quantities. So not only are they vital, they're absolute nutrients. You have to have them. And of those vitamins, there are 13 of them. 11 are from plants. That begins the conspiracy, right? You're supposed to be a plant eater. 11 are from plants. One is not a vitamin, it's a hormone, and that's vitamin D. The difference between a vitamin and a hormone is that hormones, they're in tiny quantities that have powerful effects, but they're synthesized in the body. And vitamin D is a hormone, okay? And it's produced by sunshine on your skin. And we're going to talk about that the next time around. So there you have the 12th vitamin. The 13th vitamin I'm talking about today, and that's vitamin B12. So 11 of the 13 vitamins are made by plants and they're best obtained from the food. So these are the packages that you should get your vitamins from, fruits and vegetables and underground storage organs like potatoes and sweet potatoes. And then, of course, above ground storage organs are fine, like legumes and grains. They're just fine. You just have to add a little bit of fruit or vegetable to get the vitamin A and vitamin C. Your minerals. The plants grow. For them to grow, they require 18 essential nutrients. 3 of them come from the air. They're hydrogen, carbon, and oxygen. The rest of them have to come from the ground. And the way they get into all animals is the animals eat plants. I mean, no animal eats ground, or at least, you don't think of them eating ground, you think of them eating plants. And so directly eating the soil is not a way that you get your minerals. What happens is the minerals, they dissolve in watery solutions in the soil, and they're absorbed in the roots of the plants, and they're incorporated in the roots, stems, leaves, flowers, and fruits of the plant. And then the animal comes along and eats the plant. That's how you get all your minerals, except for the ones that essential nutrients, except for the ones that come from the air. And you, as a vegan or vegetarian, you're told that you don't get sufficient amounts of iron and zinc. That's a big push. Even though iron and zinc come from the ground, even though iron is part of the chlorophyll process for transferring oxygen. Even though that iron deficiency does rarely, if ever, occurs due to an inadequate diet, it occurs as a consequence of bleeding, usually often microscopic, sometimes gross bleeding, and malabsorption of iron, which is most commonly due to dairy products. The iron that you get in your food is complex with phosphorus, and as a result, it forms insoluble complexes, and it's not absorbed. The calcium and phosphorus complex the iron. And so you might eat beef, or you might eat, or you might eat green beans, and there's plenty of iron in there. And unfortunately, that iron is not able to be absorbed if you eat dairy products along with it. So That's the reason that you develop iron deficiency. But the reason you're told you're going to be iron deficient is because the assumption is the right diet for you is a diet of meat. And even though all plants are loaded with iron, there are even heavier concentrations of iron and zinc. That's the other promotion. Heavy concentrations of zinc in animal foods, poultry and beef and pork and so on. And where did that cow or pig or chicken get the iron? They got it from eating plants, and they concentrated it in their body tissues. And if you assume that the right diet is a diet that contains these animal foods, then you're left with people who believe that you have iron deficiency because you're not eating as much iron as, say, an omnivore or a partial carnivore. Carnivores are really, really sick. So you're not eating, that's where the assumption comes from. And the same thing with zinc. There's lots of zinc in the muscle of animals. And if I assume that a correct diet is for eating animal muscles, and you are a vegan, vegetarian, then I have to assume you're zinc deficient because you're not eating the same concentration as are in animal foods. But you're eating plenty. All right, so you have to, it has to be in the ground. These are elements. They're neither created or destroyed. They have to be in the ground. So you have these 15 different elements like nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, sulfur, magnesium, calcium, iron, boron, magnesium, zinc, and molybdenum, copper. That the way you get them is not by eating ground, it's by eating plants as you're supposed to. So the idea that you're on a mineral deficient diet is complete nonsense. And of course, you see this if you look up for cases, for example, of zinc deficiency, essentially unknown. You know, I found some cases of zinc deficiency in people living in rural Iran. And what happened is that if they ate unleavened bread, because the bread complexed the zinc, they were not able to get enough zinc in their diet. But once you leavened the bread, then the zinc was freed up and there was no iron or no zinc deficiency. And the same thing as I tried to tell you with iron deficiency, it's just, you know, you're bleeding. Any doctor who sees you and you have iron deficiency, the first thing that doctor looks for is sources of blood. Blood loss from the uterus, blood loss from the bowel with a polyp or cancer, or from the stomach from an ulcer. That's where every doctor looks, is the source of bleeding. And then, as I mentioned, you have that issue of calcium and phosphorus, complexing iron that's in other foods. So if you drink dairy products, that's of course the next thing you look at, or the same thing you look at that particular time. All right, I want to make sure we're all clear that when I'm talking to you about supplements, I'm not talking to you about herbal medicines. I'm not talking to you about ginkgo biloba, saw palmetto, glucosamine, MSM. These are drugs. They're medicines that are derived from plants. They're not isolated, concentrated nutrients. And some of them have an effectiveness. And they're natural, so you'd assume they had fewer side effects. But you also would assume that they don't have the potency, the quality that you're looking for, because they're natural and they're not pushed so much. But a lot of these are very effective, and they're termed as supplements. But that's not what we're talking about today. We're talking about isolated, concentrated nutrients, vitamins and minerals. The excuse I hear from people is that soil is depleted. Well, that may be if you eat all your food within, say, 25 miles of your village. And there are grounds that are depleted in certain minerals, like I just showed you the 15 different minerals. But plants require these minerals to grow, except for they don't require selenium. And but again, it's very difficult to find selenium deficiency. And plants don't need iodine. They grow better with iodine, but they don't have to be in the soil. So that's why there is really a thing called iodine deficiency. There was the goiter belt of the Great Lakes, and now still in Africa, there are are regions in Africa where there are villages where people eat within, say, 25 miles of their village. All the food is growing there, and they can be deficient in iodine. But what I want to point out to you is that people don't eat just from one region, grown in one local soil. You know, they eat apples from Washington. They eat corn from Idaho. They eat rice grown in Louisiana. They eat foods grown from many different parts. And so if there is a deficiency in one area, it's going to be compensated by food grown in another region. So the idea that soil is depleted is not practically true, except for the iodine deficiency. You know, that is a real happening and something that was corrected. The way they corrected it was they added iodine to the salt. And that essentially wiped out the thyroid disease that was caused by iodine deficiency. Now in Africa, what they do is they give injections that are made of iodine and a fat, a vegetable fat. They give the people injections, and that lasts them a long time, plenty of iodine for a long time. They correct the goiter problems. And by the way, I hope you caught this particular message, and that is that a plant's not going to grow without making these vitamins. It needs them for its own processes. And a plant's not going to grow without having minerals that it requires too. So the plants in themselves they're complete. Now, the reason I don't recommend you take supplements is there's no bang for the buck. I haven't seen in my career, which extends for over half a century, I haven't seen people get well. I've never seen scurvy. I've never seen beriberi. I've never seen pellagra. Not in my modern practice. I've never seen people get well no matter how many thousands of dollars they spend on supplements. Just don't see it. Your friends don't have deficiency diseases. They have diseases of excess animal food, excess vegetable oils. That's why they're sick. That's why they're overweight. It's not from deficiencies, even though, you know, a lot of people would say a lot of supplements. And, you know, when you say that you need to take a supplement, you're taking the attitude that somehow there's some lab technician, you know, sitting down in their laboratory that's smarter than God. And what they did is they improved on Mother Nature. And I just don't believe that. But one of the things we're going to talk about is that when you take these supplements, you create harmful imbalances in your system that do cause diseases. I found this interesting when I was doing the research for this particular lecture. You may know this singer, I didn't. James Blunt, he claims he was diagnosed with the sailor's disease, scurvy, after going on a meat-only diet out of principle against his vegan friends. You know how political it is for you to be a vegan. Well, how the carnivores and omnivores are after you. They're really not carnivores, not for any long period of time. Things happened like happened to this man. In 2 months, he developed scurvy, eating an all-meat diet. Why? Because there's no vitamin C in meat, any animal products. Animal products are deficient. As far as minerals are concerned, dairy products may be plentiful in calcium, but they're deficient in iron. And meat may be plentiful in iron, but it's deficient in calcium. So there's where really your deficiencies come from, is eating the animal foods. And of course, the vegetable oils, they're just isolated, concentrated oil. And everything's gone. They're empty calories. So if you're going to get into any kind of trouble, that's what you're going to get into. And that's how you need to respond, is you need to respond by fixing the problem, which is to get the food right, not by taking a bunch of pills. Let's talk about antioxidants first. Antioxidants back in the 1980s were really, really popular because that was the way you were supposed to prevent heart disease and also to prevent cancer. Because what we found is when you look around the world, you look at epidemiology, where disease is common and where it's rare in various parts of the planet Earth. And then you look at people's diets, what you find is people who eat diets that are high in beta-carotene. Beta-carotene is from plants. It's a precursor of vitamin A, and it's converted into the active form of vitamin A, which is retinol. And vitamin E is found in your legumes, in your wheat, and all the plant foods. And so what they did is they made this relationship. And it was true. I mean, foods that you picked that were deficient in these antioxidants were related to a high risk of certain kinds of cancers, as well as heart disease. And so the assumption is that all we have to do is find out what these ingredients were that prevented cancer and heart disease, and we isolate them out, and we make a ton of money selling them to people. And of course, people are happy because they don't have to eat the vegetables. They instead just take a pill, eat whatever garbage they wanted to. So it became popular to sell pills of beta-carotene and vitamin A. Your carotenoids are found in fruits and vegetables. Beta-carotene is one of the carotenoids. There are 750 natural carotenoids, which are in fruits and vegetables. And of those 750, the human being needs 50 of them, 50 different carotenoids. One of them is beta-carotene, but the other 49 are not beta-carotene. So fruits and vegetables are loaded with antioxidants, beta-carotenes. One thing I want to straighten out right now that I know some of you are confused about is the idea that you don't want to eat white food, okay? You don't want to eat white food. You're told that color is really important because colorful fruits and vegetables, they indicate a diet high in various carotenoids. The color does. But you're told, don't eat anything white. This is an interesting article that kind of looks into this with a different point of view. White vegetables are a forgotten source of nutrients. Why? Because white is all colors. All right. Black is the absence of colors. So white is the most colorful of all foods there are out there. So if you find white food, it could either be really good or really bad. It could be really bad, like in white chicken, white tuna, white bread, and white sugar. That's the bad side. But people just don't avoid those things. They also avoid potatoes and dried beans and cauliflower and turnips and onions and parsnips and mushrooms and corn. They do because they misinterpret the statement that white is bad and colorful is good. Don't fall into that trap anymore. You know what the bad things are. The animal foods and the vegetable oils, and the good things are often white food. But remember, they're the most colorful of all the foods because they contain the whole spectrum of light. Black is the absence of light. All right, so anyway, they had that bit of knowledge, and they decided to put it to the test and see whether or not feeding beta-carotene to people would reduce the risk of cancer. And they started out by putting smokers and asbestos workers on beta-carotene supplements, pills, not carrots and potatoes and other fruits and vegetables. They put them on the supplements, the pills that you're being sold. And this is a randomized controlled trial. So they had a group that was a control group. And they expected to see that the people who are at higher risk for lung cancer, those exposed to smoke, cigarette smoke, and those who are exposed to asbestos would be protected by eating these pills, these beta-carotene pills. And what they found was those who took the supplements compared to the placebo group had 28% more lung cancer. This is really important research. And they did several of these studies. And, one conclusion is an important harm of increased lung cancer incidence was reported with the use of beta-carotene by persons who smoked tobacco and had occupational exposure to asbestos. Where'd that come from? I mean, where'd that statement come from? That's not back in 1996 or a distant past of 20 or 30 years ago. That statement comes out of a U.S. Preventative Task Force statement that was just published in June of this year. All right, now I'm going to tell you why you get the opposite of what you would expect to get. It has to do with causing nutritional imbalances. Remember, there are 50 different carotenoids that you have to have in your diet, and they all come from fruits and vegetables. And these carotenoids, they all could also come from supplements, some of the carotenoids. It couldn't be just beta-carotene you're taking, but you're taking an isolated concentrated nutrient. Well, these 50 carotenoids, let's just say you get them from the food, these 50 carotenoids, you chew and swallow them, and they go in your intestinal tract and then into your bloodstream, past the gut barrier. They go into the bloodstream, and then they have to go into the cell. And inside the cell, they go into the cytoplasm. That's the kind of the liquid stuff that's inside the cell. They just float around until they connect themselves with a receptor called a carotenoid receptor. And then they act. Well, carotenoid receptors, they attach to the 50 different carotenoids. There's one single kind of receptor called a carotenoid receptor in the cell, and all of these 50 different carotenoids attach to that kind of receptor. Well, what happens when you flood the system with just one carotenoid with beta-carotene? What are the other 49 going to do? They don't get to attach and work and cause balance in the system. Maybe an analogy would be you'd go to work and you pass through the front door and you just walk around. You go to the water cooler and you talk to your friends, and nothing's really done. Nothing's really done until you sit down at your work desk and you attach yourself to the internet. You create these nutritional imbalances by flooding the system with an isolated, concentrated nutrient. Now you understand why these vitamin pills have the potential to cause you to be sick. They imbalance your system. Well, let's take a look at some of the research. Antioxidants for heart disease protection. This, again, was really popular back in the 80s and 90s. This is doctors prescribe for heart patients antioxidant pills. And so one study of 1,800 male smokers who had a history of heart disease, they were taking vitamin E or beta-carotene together singly, and it resulted in an increased risk of fatal heart attacks. If you want to read the study, I just kind of grabbed a portion out of it, is the proportion of, this is the conclusion right from the study, the proportion of major coronary events in men with a previous myocardial infarction who smoked was not decreased with either vitamin E or beta-carotene supplements. In fact, the risk of fatal coronary heart disease was increased in groups that received either of these supplements, vitamin E or beta-carotene. Well, you know why. Now you know why. It's because nutritional imbalances were caused in your cells by flooding the system with concentrated, isolated nutrients. Just giving vitamin E to elderly, and half the elderly people take a mineral and a vitamin supplement. So this is common. These supplements, well, let's look at this particular study showed, and neither daily multi-mineral supplementation at a physiologic dose or 200 milligrams of vitamin E showed a favorable effect on the incidence and severity of acute respiratory infections in well-nourished, non-institutionalized, in other words, they weren't in assisted living homes or nursing homes. In elderly, instead, we observed adverse effects of vitamin E, increase of illness. Cochrane, I love to have Cochrane on my side. Cochrane is a organization worldwide that does reviews. It's made of, it consists of 40,000 scientists and doctors and experts in particular fields, and they evaluate treatments, information on medicine and health and so on, all the way from, say, head lice to the most powerful cancer chemotherapy agents. And then what they do is they write a summary. They have the time, they have the interest in this particular field. And so they will review it, and they'll do something called a Cochrane review. That's what they do at the Cochrane collaboration. So a couple of their reports, 14 randomized trials involving 170,000 people were using beta-carotene, vitamins A, C, E, and selenium alone or in combination showed no effect at decreasing cancer. The results of 7 studies showed a small but significant increase in mortality for using these supplements. Furthermore, a combination of beta-carotene and vitamin A, in other words, the active form, associated with increased risk of death. Another report from Cochrane is beta-carotene and vitamin E in combination shows a 10% increased risk in death. And I particularly can relate to this one because every morning for breakfast, I'd get a bowl of cereal with milk, of course, from my mother, my well-meaning mother. And she would give me a 1-a-day supplement with a glass of orange juice. And I knew there was something wrong because I got terrible, terrible indigestion after this concoction of the vitamin pill, which, makes you sick. I should have known better. I continued to take them. Well, they did a review of 1-a-day multivitamins, no particular brand, and what they found is 9,000 premature deaths occurred for every 1 million people treated with these antioxidant supplements. You can count on this. Here's the report that just came out in June of this year, U.S. Preventative Task Force. They're the most reliable source of health information for people in the United States. And what they did is they looked at the effect of mineral and vitamin and multivitamin supplements to prevent cardiovascular disease, in other words, strokes and heart attacks, and cancer. And their recommendation is against the use of beta-carotene and vitamin E supplements for the prevention of cardiovascular disease and cancer. And the conclusion, USPSTF recommends with moderate certainty that the harms of beta-carotene supplementation outweigh the benefits for the prevention of cardiovascular disease or cancer. No net benefit of supplementation with vitamin E for the prevention of cardiovascular disease or cancer. They just came out with this extensive review. You're buying this stuff. Okay, let's talk a little bit about folic acid. That's another of the supplements that people take a lot of. And folate received its name following its isolation from spinach. Okay, spinach, I guess in Latin, folium means leaf. It was discovered in 1941. Now, there's a difference between folate, which is the plant form of this vitamin, the natural form, and folic acid, which are the pills that you take. Well known is the effect of folic acid in preventing folate, and folic acid in preventing neural tube defects. This is a catastrophe. I saw this when I was a young doctor working on the obstetrics ward, in the pediatric ward. Little children would be born with their spinal cord open and the nerves exposed, and they were paraplegic. Or another extent of this neural tube defect, the neural tube, the brain that goes down the spinal column, was I was in a delivery room on the birth of 2 children that had anencephaly. That means they were born without a brain. And this is due to the absence of, it's the absence of folate. The absence of plant substances really due to the solution. The solution was to tell all women, and you know this, if you're in the reproductive years, is to tell all women to take folic acid supplements when they're at an age of reproduction. You have to do it before you're pregnant because the defects occur before you even know you're pregnant. Okay, so a standard recommendation is to avoid a spina bifida, anencephaly, and heart defects and cleft palate is for you to be on a folic acid supplement. Why would that be necessary? It's because people eat a folate deficient diet. They don't eat plants. Folks have been around on this planet for a long time, 4 million years. You're looking at hominids, 750,000 to 1 million years if you're looking at Homo sapiens. And, I can only guess that we did, and I'm probably right, that we didn't have these problems. Why? Because a woman's diet was loaded with folate. And now we have to tell all women to consciously take pills. And they have to start taking them as soon as they're reproductive age. to prevent these serious neural tube defects. That doesn't make sense. What makes sense is to put the population, all the population, not just the women, on a folate sufficient diet. In other words, plant foods. All plant foods are loaded with folate, not just leafy vegetables. All right. So it works, and the recommendations out there, and if that's the best you can do, for your children or you can't talk your granddaughter into doing it. And that's the best you can do, I suppose, take the pills, but you might as well fix the problem. And so we've done this as a recommendation for the entire food supply of the United States. We have by law, folic acid fortification of the flour products and the cereals. Assuming that not enough women will be taking the pills on their own to prevent neural tube defects, is to fortify the whole food supply with folic acid. Well, this creates some problems because the same levels that occur from the folic acid supplements that prevent the neural tube defects cause an increased risk of other problems, like, for example, more breast cancer. They found that fortifying the food for a woman increased the risk of death, breast cancer, of dying from breast cancer, doubled it. And they also found that it increased the risk of heart disease. The same dose of folic acid that's required to prevent neural tube defects causes in adults more cancer and more heart disease. Here's the Norvit study. It's the Norwegian vitamin trial, where they gave the whole population, or at least a big segment of the population, a supplement of 0.8 milligram of folic acid and some B12 and a little B6. And they followed nearly 4,000 people for 3.5 years, and it lowered their homocysteine levels, but it increased the risk of heart attack, stroke, and death by 20%. Now, I hope you're getting the message is that, yes, you should be getting these plant-derived substances in their natural environment so that you don't create nutritional imbalances, but you ought not to be taking pills. Increase the risk of cancer. The common way of treating heart patients about 20 years ago, I hope it's stopped now, is that standard was to, of course, the drug companies are really happy about this, was to give people who are at risk for heart disease, which is like the entire population of the United States and Europe, but particularly men in either countries. And they would give him Foltex, which was a pill. This was standard therapy of folic acid and vitamin B6 and B12. This is basically what they got. It lowered homocysteine levels, which is a risk factor for heart disease, but it increased the risk of dying of heart disease. In this particular study, after 6 months of supplementation, in 636 heart patients with stents, folic acid treated patients were found to have more narrowing of the arteries, more artery closure, in other words, heart attacks, and more major cardiac events compared to those on the placebo. Stop doing that. They have. Okay, well, it's not just with vitamins that you create these mineral imbalances in the cell at the cellular level. These nutritional imbalances at the cellular level. It also occurs with minerals. When you're taking minerals, if you flood the system with one particular mineral over what is naturally in the plants, Mother Nature did it right. And what happens is you create nutritional imbalances. For example, the absorption of copper, which is an essential nutrient, is inhibited by zinc. So you take zinc pills, what happens? You inhibit copper utilization. The intestinal competition of zinc with copper, iron, lead, calcium, cadmium may accelerate nutritional deficiency and toxicity of these chemicals. Cadmium is very toxic, so is lead. And vitamins influence how the body acts with plants. You may be told that it's better to get your source of iron from meats, from animal products, because this is in the ferric form, and the plants have the ferrous form of iron. But what you rarely hear is if you take ascorbic acid, which is from plants, from fruits and vegetables, then what happens is you increase the absorption of iron to levels where essentially iron deficiency and anemia does not exist with any natural diet. It exists because people bleed and they're drinking baby calf's milk. All right, so I hope you understand so far what is being caused by when you buy these supplements. You're creating nutritional imbalances because your vitamins and your minerals, they don't really have any activity until they connect to receptors inside the cell. And by competition, by flooding the system with various vitamins and minerals, you create imbalances and you destroy your cells. You increase your risk of cancer and dying of heart disease. And heart disease. Okay, but I want to mention that supplements can be used as medicines. And even though vitamin C will not prevent a cold, they say it reduces the symptoms of colds. And vitamin D, which we're going to talk about in the next lecture series, vitamin D may delay the loss of bone in elderly. But sunshine's the right source, and it's only the elderly that are confined and they're white women that you see any benefits when it comes to vitamin D supplementation. I'm going to talk to you about that evidence. And folic acid will prevent neural tube defects, as we talked about, but you get from the folate from plants. And vitamin B12 might be a good idea for strict vegetarians. We're going to talk about this next. Iodine supplementation prevents thyroid disease. I talked to you about that. And iron deficiency is used for treating or iron supplements are used for treating iron deficiency. So we still use these in the medical business under situations where people have real problems, but they're not for they're not for your everyday health. Get over this. Let's talk about B12. B12, I knew 46 years ago that B12 would be the last bastion of argument against being a vegan. Because nobody, no scientist, no dietitian, no whatever, I don't care who you are as far as an expert, can argue that the McDougall diet is deficient in protein or amino acids or iron or calcium. You just can't do that. So what's the last bastion for you who just won't give up your meat and your dairy? You have to say, oh no, but you're going to become B12 deficient. And I know you've been exposed to this kind of criticism. B12 is, it has cobalt in it. And so it's a cobalamin, that's what it's called. And the way I get over this, and as you'll hear in a couple of times, is that I get over this criticism that is really the only criticism of the McDougall diet by saying, I understand. And so we recommend B12. And I'll show you the recommendations in just a minute. If you don't have enough B12, you get megaloblastic anemia. And that means that you have an anemia. You say you have a hemoglobin of 5 or 6 that is well tolerated and easily reversible. People are walking around with megaloblastic anemia because the cells are so big. And that's from vitamin B12 deficiency. And you might get numbing and tingling in your hands and feet, which is reversible up until late stages. Late stages of B12 deficiency, it can become, at least that's what they say. I still have some questions. It can become an irreversible condition as far as neurologic disease. Yeah. So you certainly want to prevent it and you want to treat it. Okay, these are the recommendations that I've given. First book that I wrote, all the way, every DVD and so on. Why should I bother with any criticism about the diet I recommend? Because it's so solid, the evidence that this is the nutrition for the human being. So I've kind of dispensed it with this sort of warning. If you follow the McDougall diet for more than 3 years, and it takes 20 to 30 years to run out of B12 if you've got a well-functioning intestinal tract, or if you're pregnant and nursing, then you take 5 micrograms of B12 daily. And you say, well, doc, it's pretty hard to get that low of a dose. Yeah, it is. We'll talk about it in a minute. And it takes 20 to 30 years to run out of your B12. If you have a normal functioning intestinal tract, you're recirculating your vitamin B12, which a normal healthy person does. Even if you cut out your stomach so you don't have this recirculation of B12, You have stores of 2 to 3 years. You've got plenty of time to figure out how to get your B12. Pernicious anemia. Pernicious means deadly. And this was discovered, pernicious anemia, in 1824, first time it's described. And I want to repeat that pernicious means you're going to die. So what it is due to, it's due to damage of the stomach lining, either by an autoimmune disease. Okay, the body attacks itself. We've talked about, what causes the body to attack itself. It's a longer discussion, and I want you to look at the lecture I gave on autoimmune disease to get the whole story. But essentially, it's eating animals, eating stomachs, for example, or surgery. We used to take out the stomach because of peptic ulcer disease. And then what happened is you developed B12 deficiency. You had to give B12. Well, the reason is the stomach makes something called intrinsic factor. Now, this is complicated, but it's a little important. I think you'll find the story interesting. The stomach makes something that we call intrinsic factor. And what the intrinsic factor does is it combines with extrinsic factor, which is the cobalamin, the cobalt-containing vitamin B12. And it makes it very efficient as far as its absorption. Just tiny doses of B12 can now be absorbed if you have intrinsic factor. In other words, they have your stomach producing this particular substance. And even if you don't, once you cut off the stomach, it takes 3 to 6 years to become anemic. Okay, William Castle. William Castle was one of the founding fathers of experimental hematology. In 1925, he reported the cure of pernicious anemia. What he did is he took people who were dying and from pernicious anemia. And what he did is he took and divided them into 2 groups that were dying of pernicious anemia. And he fed one group cooked ground beef to healthy subjects. Okay, so he took some healthy people, some healthy men or women, and he fed them cooked ground beef, the people with pernicious anemia. And along with that, the experimental group, he fed gastric juices after they ate the cooked ground beef. Okay, and then he took the control group and he fed them, they have pernicious anemia, cooked ground beef without giving them the stomach juices, the gastric juices. And those who got only the cooked beef, who had pernicious anemia, they suffered from profound anemia. This is pernicious. It means that you're going to die. But those who ate the combination of beef, which of course is loaded with B12, and the gastric juices, which contain intrinsic factor, in other words, that substance that's made by the stomach that makes B12 efficiently absorbed, they got cured right away. Like 100% of them got cured. And so, since then, doctors, medical students, et cetera, have been talking about when it comes to B12, and we all know this particular description, we've been talking about intrinsic factor, which is made by the stomach, and extrinsic factor, which is the actual B12 itself. This has some more relevance as we go on, but William Castle, he made these discovery reports back in 1925, about 100 years ago. So where does B12 come from? Well, B12 is synthesized by bacteria. There are a few algae that synthesize B12, but there's a question about whether the B12 is just analogs and doesn't work well. So what you're doing is you're essentially eating germs. And ruminants are particularly efficient at giving you a whole bunch of germs and a whole bunch of B12 when you eat them, because ruminants, they have 4 stomachs. And each of these stomachs is loaded with germs. And so they make lots of B12 and they store the B12 in their muscles and other tissues. And you eat the muscles and other tissues and you get these bacteria synthesized substances, the B12. No cow or sheep or other animal makes B12. Only bacteria do. And the reason that animals have this B12 is because they ate bacteria. But even human beings, we make B12 in our intestine. We make most of the B12 in the last part of the small intestine, which contains, you hear about all the time, the microbiome, 4 trillion bacteria per cc of feces. But, you know, in the normal day, you're not supposed to be eating feces. It depends on whether you have a 1-year-old around or not, and, you know, how cleanly you are, et cetera. But the concern is whether or not you can get B12. Say you stopped eating all meat, stopped taking all supplements. Would you be in contact with enough bacteria to get all the B12 you needed? The mouth is the dirtiest part of the body. You know, I was taught this as a first-year medical student. They took a swab of each of our mouths and they put it on a petri dish, and they came back a couple days later, and we all looked at the petri dish with the colonies of bacteria that were growing from our mouth. And the instructor pointed out, the mouth is the dirtiest part of the body. Okay, the problem is you swallow the bacteria that produce B12, and they go to the stomach, and they're drowned in stomach acid, and they're inactivated. But still the small intestine has bacteria that make B12. But let's just say it's not adequate, or now you ask yourself, you say, well, why, Dr. McDougall, if your diet is so perfect, it has, you know, the perfect amount of protein, the right kind of protein, amino acids, the perfect amount of calcium, iron, et cetera. Why, if it's so perfect, would it have any deficiency, like a deficiency in vitamin B12? Well, the answer, I think, is quite simple. We have this germ phobia. And it was started with Louis Pasteur, who brought to us the germ theory. He discovered germs. He discovered how food was spoiled by invisible bacteria. Back in his day, they didn't have the microscope to show the bacteria that were spoiling the food. They thought somehow it came from something in the atmosphere, some spontaneous degeneration. And he discovered germs. But, you know, even back, he knew, this is a quote from him, it's not the germs we need to worry about, it's our inner terrain. In other words, it's the health of the body. It's not the germs we got to fear, but that's not what happened. What happened is people turned out, you know, fearing germs. And so we take antibacterial mouthwashes, and we scrub our hands, we scrub our kitchen. We're fastidious about being hygienic. And, you know, there's a downside to that. So in answer to the question, why, Dr. McDougall, is your diet so perfect? Isn't deficient in anything? It's because, you know, for the first million years, people ate in a non-hygienic environment loads of B12. Okay, you go out and you grab the root vegetables from the ground, you shake the dirt off, and what you have is a whole bunch of bacteria growing on the roots of your vegetables that make B12. And then what you do is you go into your kitchen area, and, you know, your pet chicken is sitting on your counter, and what you do is remove the pet chicken and as much of the stuff that the pet chicken leaves on the counter. You cut up your food, and then you eat it. Yeah. And so maybe we just don't get enough of germs, which has always been with us and intended. You know, that's maybe why the type of diet I recommend, how many of you follow, which is a vegan diet, maybe why you have some cases of B12 deficiency. But let me tell you, they're really, really rare. You know, I can find studies of metabolic changes which reflect lower B12 in the body. But as far as real diseases, I almost come up empty-handed when I look for cases of people who suffer from B12 deficiency, megaloblastic anemia, not related to cutting the stomach out, you know, not related to getting rid of the intrinsic factor like we just talked about, but due to the fact that they eat a vegetable-based diet. They're almost non-existent. And when they do happen, it makes national headlines. Like for example, a letter to the editor, not a research paper, a letter to the editor in the New England Journal of Medicine, the year 2000. It was titled Blindness in Strict Vegetarian, and that made front page of newspapers around the world. Don't become a vegan because you're going to go blind. Now, I read this letter to the editor, and I could see what was going on. And the follow-up letters to the editors showed that my colleagues could see what was going on. What was going on is this man had a horrible diet. He was a 33-year-old man who was found to have blindness. Not a good thing. He'd been a strict vegetarian for 20 years, but tests showed he suffered from deficiencies of vitamin A, which is from plants, vitamin C, which is from plants, vitamin D, which is from sunshine, vitamin E, which is from plants, B1, which is from plants. You know, it's on the outside coating of the rice. That's how you get beriberi. And folic acid, which is from plants. He just had a horrible, horrible diet. He was suffering from severe malnutrition. And B12 shots, he corrected his anemia, but he didn't get his vision back. But this hit national headlines. Why? Because people, they like to hear good news about their bad habits. And I could just see them saying to their vegan friends, look, you want me to go blind eating a vegan diet? You know, you want me to go blind? Well, what's the risk of you going? Even if it's true, it's not. Even if it's true, your risk of having a disease is far less than 1 in a million. Your risk of having a heart attack is 1 in 2. I mean, if you decide you're going to sufficiently add B12 and you're going to eat animal foods, you have a 50% chance of dying prematurely of a heart attack or stroke. You know, you have a 1 in 7 chance of getting and dying of breast cancer, a 1 in 6 chance of prostate cancer. You know, 80% chance of suffering from overweight or obesity, and certainly constipation. I mean, compare the risks. Where are you going to take your chances? Well, that's sensationalism. People like to hear good news about their bad habits, and they're going to come up after you if they find out that you're better than them. Yeah, that's what they hear is you're better than them because you don't eat animals. You do it for the animals, you do it for animal rights, and you do it for your health. And somehow that's what they hear is you're a better person than I am. That's not what you're saying. Even though you may be a smarter person than they are. Okay, you're worried about your B12 levels. Well, get your blood checked and an accurate test. B12 values of over 200 picograms per milliliter is normal. You get this cheap test, a couple of bucks. The last time I checked, we did them on our patients occasionally. It was $13. Levels below 80 picograms represent unequivocal B12 deficiency, which is likely due to damage of your stomach. Not due to what you eat, but stomach damage, autoimmune diseases, stomach surgery, where you don't have intrinsic factor anymore. So how do I avoid the criticism? I told you what I do is I tell people follow the McDougall diet for more than 3 years. It takes 20 to 30 years to run out of B12 because it's so efficiently circulated in the intestinal tract. Or if you're pregnant or nursing, then take a minimum of 5 micrograms of supplemental B12 each day. Okay, the first question, let me tell you how much it takes to correct pernicious anemia. It takes 0.3 to 0.65 of microgram per day. So when I recommend 5 micrograms a day, I'm recommending 10 times more than you need to correct deadly anemia, severe megaloblastic anemia, pernicious anemia. I'm recommending you eat 10 times more than you need. But the first question, you come back to me and you say, well, but doc, I went to the health food store, I went to the supermarket, and all I could find was B12 in doses of 500 to 5,000 micrograms per pill. Which is compared to my 5 micrograms, it's 1,000 times greater. 5,000 micrograms is. Why do they do that? Well, the first answer I'm going to give you is they do. And that's going to take care of anybody who has missing intrinsic factor, because there's 2 types of absorption occur of B12. There's active, which involves the intrinsic factor that's made in the stomach. And there's a passive absorption of B12, which is very inefficient. It's 1,000 times less efficient. But if you take B12 pills in the concentration of 1,000 to 2,000 micrograms, you will correct any form of B12 deficiency, even in people who have the stomach lack of intrinsic factor. That's why I think they sell them in such high doses. The next question I get from me is, okay, well, what if it's that little I need to take and I can't find the dose, can I take it once a week? Oh, sure you can. Well, can I take it once a month? Well, yeah, you can take it once a month. You know, I recommend once a day because it's easier for people to remember once a day. But yeah, you can take these supplements, and the B12 is more efficiently absorbed sublingually, so you can take a sublingual supplement. But you're not going to miss. The supplements, they have the cobalamin, which means they have a cobalt molecule. That's the important part of the cobalamin molecule, the B12. But they also come in various forms, 4 different forms. And you say, well, go to the natural food store and I find a methylcobalamin, an adenosylcobalamin, a hydroxycobalamin, and a cyanocobalamin, which means cyanide and the poison. And there was concern, and the article is down there if you want to read it, about the effectiveness of the cyanide form. It wasn't really effective at reversing neurologic conditions, even though that's what if you have a B12 problem, the doctor may try and give you shots, which, by the way, I just told you are unnecessary. You can just take the pills in a dose of 1,000 to 2,000 micrograms. But, get you in getting a shot every month because you're tired or whatever. You really have B12 deficiency. That's part of the medical business. But they're giving you the cyano form. The other thing is the first two forms, the adenosine and the hydroxy forms, they're the ones that are inside the cell and are better absorbed. So those are the ones that I would take. Yeah. And, you want to cover all bases, buy a couple of different forms and, take one pill 1 week and another pill the next week. You just got, science needs to be settled on this. I used to believe that B12 supplementation caused no harm at all. I knew it wasn't true, but I used to believe it. And then there were some recent articles out that came out just a few months ago about how higher B12 levels were associated with more lung cancer. And the conclusion was that taking B12 supplements was sometimes harmful. But that's not the conclusion I came to from reading the articles. What I came to is what's probably true is those who have a B12 sufficient diet, in other words, are heavy meat eaters or animal food eaters, they have more lung cancer, because I know that. That's what the research says. The B12 issue is just incidental. So to this date, I don't think B12 supplementation is harmful or creates any serious nutritional imbalances. I think where you're getting the B12 from is very harmful from the animal foods. But I reserve the right to change my opinion. I reserve the right to change my opinion when it comes to lots of science, lots of treatments, lots of medications. Why? Because the research is incomplete and it's confusing. Even though I've probably read a good share of it, it's confusing. And so, you have to allow that for me. You have to allow me the opportunity to change my opinion. But I want to tell you, if you're waiting for me to change my opinion on what the ideal diet is of the human being, in other words, that you're a starch eater, a starchitarian, a starchivore, it's not going to happen. I've been thinking about this for a long time. It's just plain and simple not going to happen. So you might as well just give in. All right, so you're a vegan. You don't want to eat pills. And you don't want to eat meat. Is there any other option for you? Well, seaweed has bacteria on it. And it's declared a most excellent source of vitamin B12, edible seaweeds for strict vegetarians. And there's the research for you if you want to read it. All right, I think we should quit this lecture. You need to get vitamins, which are vital in small organic compounds. And 11 of 13 vitamins are made by plants, and so you get them by plants. And the one we're going to talk about next time we get together is made by sunshine. It's a hormone. And you already know enough about B12, don't you? And believe me, I don't want to have any criticism about what I recommend. People love to hear good news, and believe it or not, there are probably a few people out there that like to hear McDougall went down in flames. So any of you develop tingling in your toes from B12 deficiency, and they somehow interpret it as being due to our diet, I'm going to make front page headlines in all your newspapers. Just like this vegan went blind. Good news about bad habits. So same thing with the minerals. They come from the ground. They get to you through plants. You can't miss. Taking isolated concentrated nutrients causes you to be sick. It's not just a waste of money. All right. So I just want to add here is a couple of things. If you like what we have to say and you're in trouble, which most people are, you need some help getting your life straightened around because you're tired of being overweight and being on a bunch of drugs that are probably doing you more harm than good. We run a program. We run a 12-day internet-based program where you can take it from any place in the world. We've got 50 people right now who are taking that program with problems from heart disease to obesity to kidney failure to cancer, and they get diet therapy. In other words, they get their problems fixed with food, which is the most powerful medicine there is. If you listen to my lecture on Sunday on diet therapy, you know what I'm telling you. It's not an exaggeration. You want to fix the problem, you fix it by changing your diet. You fix the problem, which is the bad food. You want to get off your medication. That's one of the major goals of our program is to get you off the drugs. Sick people take drugs. And we run one of these programs every month. And I would, if you've had enough, you're really worried because you've gone on for so long and not in good health, then let us help you. Let us help you make the changes. If you're not quite ready yet, hopefully Chef AJ will keep having me on the show, and I'll keep taking bits of your thinking and hopefully turning them around. Plus, Mary and I and Heather are going to start a Sunday evening Fireside Chat. We've got hundreds of people signed up already, and hopefully we'll get hundreds more, and I invite you to do it. It's free. The only advertisement that you're going to get is you're going to get an advertisement for our program because it's our business. And because, we really believe in it. We really want you to have this opportunity. And so we're going to advertise the program just like I'm doing here right now. But nothing else. And it's a place where you can bring friends and family. You get better, you lose 120 pounds, you get off your blood pressure pills, your diabetic pills. And they look at you and they go, my goodness, what did you do? And you tell them what you did. And they say, that's crazy. It must be some kind of health food nut recommending it. Well, tell them, look, you can come and meet John and Mary McDougall every Sunday evening, 5 o'clock Pacific time. And you sit down and watch them, see who they are, decide whether or not they're trying to do you good or harm. And I think this is a good way to get people going away and saying, this is not so unreasonable. This makes a lot of sense. And these people really are interested in my health. Not trying to sell me something. They're really interested in my health. We do this absolutely free of charge, anonymously. Every Sunday evening, 5 o'clock Pacific time. And Chef AJ is going to put the link up there for you. And go to the link and sign up. And okay, well, let's see. I'm probably too tired. What time is it, Mary?
11:10.
Not bad for a lecture that I thought would take 10 minutes.